Go ahead and get started. Hi and welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day today to join us. This is our 7th installment of our ongoing webinar series on tariffs and trade policy. I'm really glad you're here with us. Before we jump in, some quick housekeeping. The Q&A box, the chat box, will stay open throughout the session today. If we have time at the end of the session, we'll take a few questions live and get to as many as we can. A quick disclaimer before we get started, the information that we share here is for informational purposes only, should not be considered legal advice. As we're all seeing, trade policy, it moves very quick. New guidance from the administration or CBP could shift some of what we cover. So for those of you who we haven't met, my name is Kate Rayer. I am the Vice President of Regulatory Services here at Green Worldwide. I've been in this industry for over 2 decades now, with 6 of them here at Green. I lead our Global Trade Solutions group. And my team, what we specialize in is custom services, including foreign trade zones, duty drawback, tariff strategy, advisory services, and our enterprise level customs brokerage. I'm actively involved in industry leadership with the National Association of Foreign Trade Zones and the World Trade Center, Denver. So why are we here today? A lot of our clients are asking, what does this headline mean? How do I know which tariffs apply to my products? What is happening now? Our goal today is to help you cut through that noise and to help you understand what's happening, what may be coming next, and what all of it could mean for your business. We do have a full agenda today. I'm going to be covering everything from the government shutdown to country-specific tariff updates, new Section 232 and 301 actions, what's going on with the IEEPA case. I do want to talk about the entry timelines as well, because I've been getting a lot of questions about, post-summary corrections and protests, so I'll cover that. We'll talk about tariff tool authority and how that's being used, and also the foundation of tariff application. So with all of that, let's go ahead and get started. First, I'm going to get into the government shutdown and what's going on with that. All right. So, as many of you are aware, at this point, the federal government has shut down. This does create some uncertainty across various agencies and how it applies to imports and exports. So for trade professionals, the key question is, what happens with CBP? Will my cargo still move? Will I still see clearances? And, the good news is that CBP has confirmed that they remain open for business. Ports of entry are fully staffed, cargo clearances are continuing, and trade-related functions are operational. CSMS messaging, they have said that they will continue to issue these notices, so trade can expect ongoing communications as usual. Importantly, CBP will also continue to provide import entry related guidance for executive orders. So if there is a White House directive on tariffs, we can expect CBP to implement them. A specific example of this is with the new entry process for lumber and furniture tariffs. As far as we know, it is still on track to go live on October 14th, even with the shutdown. So regarding ITC and HTS related updates, as far as we know, CBP will continue to coordinate with the ITC and determine if the HTS updates will proceed during the shutdown. If there are refunds, they technically will be processed. However, questions do remain about whether Treasury will actually release those payments during the shutdown. ACE will continue to remain supported and available to the trade. PGAs, or partner government agencies, we may see some challenges here. Many PGAs could be operating with limited staff or furloughs, so this is one area to monitor closely if you do have imports that are affected by PGAs. FTZs and bonded warehouses, requests for activations and ongoing management, we should continue to see these processed as normal. And the key takeaway here is that while CBP is maintaining operations, the shutdown could introduce delays with other agencies, including your PGAs or Treasury. For importers and brokers, it's critical to continue to monitor related CSMS notices and stay aligned with compliance partners to navigate any changes or challenges there. Okay, So getting into the latest updates on tariffs and trade developments with key U.S. trading partners. So with Canada, they recently removed some specific counter tariffs in September. So that is a positive step. The one thing that we are watching very closely with Canada is the upcoming USMCA review. That is scheduled for 2026. For this, the public comment period is already open and the first hearing is scheduled for November. So businesses should be using this opportunity to submit feedback and comments where prudent. Mexico, like Canada, is also going to be a part of the USMCA review with the same comment period and hearing timeline. One specific call out regarding Mexico, they are a significant supplier of the heavy trucks. And with the, recent tariff updates that were released, this could be pretty impactful to Mexico, depending on how these tariff details are released. And that is still pending at this time. With China, the temporary tariff reduction pause is set to expire in November. Importantly, there are indications that President Trump and President Xi are going to be meeting at the APEC summit in South Korea. This meeting is tentatively scheduled for October 31st and November 1st. However, it is unclear whether trade will be on this potential meeting agenda. But the key thing to keep in mind here is that right now, that reduction pause is set to expire in November. For the UK, no real updates there other than they are still working on the potential steel and aluminum quota. That's the design and implementation of any quota that would be issued between the UK and the US. And they're also still working on pharmaceutical negotiations. For Indonesia, the framework agreement that was announced back in July is still pending formalization and implementation, so no real movement there. On Taiwan, Commerce Secretary Lutnick, he did indicate that there is a potential deal coming with Taiwan. However, details have not been released yet. India still remains under the 50% total tariff. That is the 25% reciprocal plus the 25% tied to the Russian oil imports. There are some exemptions to these tariffs to keep in mind, but overall, this one does remain, one of the toughest tariff regimes that is currently in effect. Similar story with Brazil. Brazil is currently at a 50% tariff. This is the 10% reciprocal plus the 40% that was added due to policies, practices, and actions of the Brazilian government. Again, with this one, there are some exemptions for these tariffs to keep in mind, but these two, both India and Brazil, currently have staggering 50% tariffs on them. For Vietnam, there hasn't been any recent changes. However, did want to call out that Vietnam is a large exporter of furniture products, so we do expect to see some impacts to Vietnam imports related to furniture. Okay, getting into Japan and the EU. So there have been some significant updates for both Japan and the EU. For Japan, on September 4th, the administration issued an executive order implementing the US-Japan trade agreement. So this framework here, this one is retroactive back to August 7th, and it applies the baseline 15% tariff structure similar to the EU. Additionally, effective September 16th, we see specific changes for automotive products. So these are now subject to a 15% tariff inclusive of the MFN or most favored nation rates. And civil aircraft, except for unmanned aircraft, are exempt from reciprocal tariffs on steel, aluminum, and copper. The Federal Register notices and CBP bulletins, they detail out, the requirements and the exemptions. So if you do have commodities that could be impacted by these exemptions, it's very important to go through them and make sure that the imports qualify. There are specific requirements for each of those to make sure that you are aligned with. So just because you have, a civil aircraft part and it's importing from Japan, it doesn't necessarily mean it's qualified. You need to go check the implementation details and go through those and make sure. For the EU, on September 5th, another executive order was issued modifying the reciprocal tariff rates for the EU. More specifically, what it does is it implements some of the details outlined in the earlier framework agreement. So retroactive back to August 1st, automotive tariffs will be included in the 15% cap. This one does include the Section 232 tariffs, which is a bit of a change to keep in mind there. And as of September 1st, there are also some carve-outs for specific products, including unavailable natural resources and those used in pharma applications, civil aircraft products, except unmanned. Those do have exemptions. But again, same story as with Japan, that the key thing is to make sure that you review all of the requirements and exemptions to make sure that they apply to the imports. So the key takeaway here is that for both Japan and the EU, these agreements and the applicability dates are retroactive for some of these. So this could affect prior shipments. Again, exemptions are narrowly defined. So the classification and documentation, the description of the product, these will be key in determining where relief to these tariffs may apply. So make sure, again, to review those details carefully, confirm the exemptions apply. If they do, communicate this to your broker and ensure your entries are filed correctly to receive those exemptions if they do apply to your imports. Okay, getting into the IEEPA reciprocal tariffs. These are not new. We covered these in the last webinar. This was an update as of July 31st. There are some changes to this that have happened since then that I do want to cover. So as a refresher, countries listed in Annex 1 of this executive order will be subject to the reciprocal tariff rates as listed. Countries not listed in Annex 1 will instead face the 10% tariff on their merchandise. These measures were effective back in August. On the right-hand side, you see the breakdown by country showing their adjusted tariff rates. And again, there are a few things to point out here. There are some higher tariff rates for specific countries, countries like Algeria, South Africa, Switzerland. These are all some of the higher rates. Again, the EU and Japan, they do have the more complex treatment, as we just discussed. The way this breaks out for products not exempted is that the column 1 duty rate, if the MFN rate is greater than 15%, there will be no additional reciprocal tariffs. If the column 1 general duty rate is less than 15%, the tariff will be the most favored nation rate plus the difference to get to 15%. Keeping in mind there are those exemptions to consider. Again, China, Canada, and Mexico, these are all covered under different tariff orders under the IEEPA 1 or IEEPA fentanyl orders. So these are not currently under the reciprocal tariff orders. Some of the changes to call out. So in September, Annex 2, which is where you'll see the different exclusions at the HTS level, these were changed in September. So some new ones were added and some ones were also removed. So if you reviewed these back in August, it's important to go back and check again because these were again updated in September. The other update regarding Annex 2 is that the latest 232 order for timber, lumber, and derivatives did remove over 150 HTS numbers from Annex 2. So again, it's important to go back if you haven't reviewed these since these changes to make sure that your exemptions, if available, apply and that you don't have new exemptions that you could potentially use. Okay, so diving into the latest Section 232 tariff actions regarding timber, lumber, and derivative wood products. So these were announced via social media and then quickly formalized with an executive order, which was issued on September 29th. The social media post originally said effective on October 1st, but then when the official notice came out, the effectivity date is October 14th. So these tariffs were imposed under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act, which allows action when imports are deemed to threaten national security. So these tariffs apply to specific HTS classifications and product descriptions of softwood lumber products, upholstered wooden products, and certain wood cabinets, vanities, and parts. And at this time, there isn't a breakout to split out the value of just the wood contained in these products, like there is with steel and aluminum. So what this means is that, if you do import wood products, check the HTS lists that are impacted by these tariffs, and also check the product descriptions to see if they apply to your imports. An important thing to call out here is that we do expect that these lists will expand. So again, just like we saw with steel and aluminum recently, there will be an inclusion process for these tariffs. So we do expect to see additional HTS lines to be included at a future date. So again, starting on October 14th, softwood lumber, timber products, these will be at a 10% tariff. Upholstered wooden products will be at a 25% tariff. Wooden cabinets, vanities, and parts will be at a 25% tariff. And then starting next year on January 1st, upholstered wooden products will raise to 30%, and cabinets, vanities, those double up to 50%. There are some partner carve-outs for the EU, Japan, and the UK. So for the EU and Japan, these 232 tariffs are capped at 15%, including the most favored nation rate. And for the UK, the tariffs may not exceed 10% above that MFN baseline. There are several important exceptions to go over. So goods will not face additional reciprocal tariffs or IEEPA tariffs targeting Brazil and India. Instead, they will only pay these Section 232 tariffs. If the auto tariffs also cover a product, then only the auto tariffs apply. And similarly, if a product is subject to the IEEPA tariffs for Canada and Mexico, they will only pay this Section 232 tariff. So a little bit of moving and shaking around on the tariff stacking orders. Other things to note, FTZs, privileged foreign status is required. Interestingly, for these, duty drawback is available. So that was honestly a bit of a surprise because, the other 232 orders, this has not been an option. So drawback is available. There will be an inclusion process again. So do expect that we will see additional products be added. And like the other 232, there is no in-transit exemption that has been announced. So the key point here is that if you do import wood products, check your HTS list against the annex of this order, along with the product descriptions of your imported products to see if you are subject. If you do have an HTS on the list, but the description doesn't match, you'll want to check that carefully and work with your customs broker to ensure that those entries are filed correctly. Okay. I want to talk a little bit more about the other tariff announcements that were made via social media posts. So this is regarding pharma, and this is also the heavy trucks. So regarding pharma, a large majority of imported patented drugs are made, or, more importantly, for CBP origin decisions where their active pharmaceutical ingredients are made in the EU, Switzerland, Japan, or the UK. The social media post said that companies that are constructing new facilities in the US will be exempted from the 232 tariffs, but we need a lot more information to determine exactly what that means regarding, how the administration is defining this. There's the whole, they have broken ground on US production. Is it under construction? Will they get exemptions for all of the imports because of this, or only certain products that they're currently planning to produce in the US? Are there other parameters? Will the same exemptions apply to, other commodities? Do you produce every single product in the United States? A lot of these companies that import these products, they don't make every product here. Are branded and patented synonymous for each other? There's a lot of what ifs and questions regarding exactly how this will be implemented. So until there's an EO out, there's a lot more questions than answers. So we're waiting to get that out before we can answer more questions on it. The same questions apply with the heavy truck tariffs. There has been no executive order issued on this at this time. We don't know yet if they will be issued with the government shutdown either. So more information to come on this. At this time, again, all we have is these social media posts. There is no Federal Register notice. There is no executive order. There is no CSMS message. So again, the government shutdown may impact this. We don't know yet. So a lot more questions than answers at this time. Okay, so we've talked about this before, about the open Section 232 investigations. So these are, again, related to national security. So these sectoral investigations have become a favored tool of the administration, and they typically, from a timeline perspective, take about 9 to 12 months to complete these investigations. So outside of copper, steel, and aluminum, we have seen several more of these start to move into the tariff phase. So this includes what we just talked about with, timber, lumber, derivatives, pharma, and trucks. As you can see, looking at the timeline, these investigations were initiated earlier this year. We are seeing them move a little faster than the typical 9 to 12 month timeline. But as you can see here, there are several other sectors that, depending on how these outcomes of these investigations go, may start to move into tariff phases as well. So the other sectors that are impacted are going to be semiconductors and semiconductors manufacturing equipment, processed critical minerals and derivative products, commercial aircraft and jet engines, polysilicon and its derivatives, and unmanned aircraft systems and parts. Additionally, just recently, a few new investigations were announced. These include personal protective equipment, medical devices and supplies, robotics and industrial machinery, and wind turbines. So for each of these where tariffs haven't been announced, once Commerce completes the investigation, it will report its findings to the administration. And if the report does conclude that the imports do pose a threat to national security, we will likely see that tariffs or other measures will follow. So if you are a stakeholder in these industries, closely monitor these investigations, consider submitting comments if the comment periods are open, and prepare for potential outcomes, including tariffs. Okay. Getting more into 232 for steel and aluminum. So back in August, on August 15th, it was a Friday night, right about 5 o'clock, Commerce announced a significant expansion to Section 232 and Section 232 steel and aluminum tariffs. So these were published on a Friday and effective the following Monday. And what this expansion did is it added 407 new HTS subheadings, which greatly broadens the range of products that are covered under these orders. So importers, if you haven't already, carefully review your tariff classifications to identify the exposure across these expanded categories. What this does is this expansion increases cost. It increases the compliance burden, and it makes these tariffs apply to a much wider range of downstream products. So some of the newly covered items include wind turbines, compressors, pumps, furniture, heavy equipment, and parts and components. Even rail cars are on these lists. So for these products, 50% tariffs apply if they contain steel or aluminum inputs. A thing to call out, just to make sure everybody is aware here, there is another inclusion window that actually just closed. So it just closed on September 29th. So when we were talking about the inclusions to other commodities, the same thing applies here to steel and aluminum products. So if there was an inclusion request submitted that gets approved, we may see that additional tariffs will apply to even more downstream products. So after closing of the inclusion request period, what happens is they go into a 2-week public comment period, and all of this is public. So if you are curious, you can go to regulations.gov, and I put the docket ID up here for you, and you can go see, what different comments have been submitted. An important thing to note here, though, is that with the government shutdown, we may see this timeline move around depending on, you know, if there is enough staff or if anyone has been furloughed who's doing these reviews. But if the timeline sticks, we would see that the comment period would be over in 2 weeks, and that we would potentially see, if the timelines follow the past historical ones, that this could roll out as early as December. The other thing is that the next inclusion window is going to be in January. So this is going to be an ongoing saga. We're going to continue to see these lists expand over time. But again, you can be active in this. You can go submit comments if you do have products that are potentially impacted here. So again, it's on regulations.gov. Go check it out if you're curious. Okay, turning our attention over to Section 301. So in August, so on August 28th, the USTR extended exclusions under 2 different HTS subheadings through the end of November. These cover medical care and other critical supply chain products. And this extension, while it provides short-term relief, you know, the USTR is continuing to review the broader exclusion framework. So the key deadlines here is that in mid-October, there's a final day to submit comments on the possible further extension of Section 301 exclusions. And then in November, at the end of November, is when other 301 exclusions are currently set to expire unless renewed. Interestingly as well, on September 25th, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit upheld the legality of the List 3 and List 4A tariffs on China. So the court confirmed that USTR has broad authority under Section 301 to modify or terminate any action under Section 301 if deemed appropriate. So the ruling emphasized that modify does include the power to significantly increase tariffs if existing measures are deemed insufficient. The court also rejected challenges under the non-delegation doctrine and the major questions doctrine. So the key takeaway here is that the ruling does reinforce USTR's ability to adjust and expand these tariffs, so future increases remain legally supported at this time. Other 301 updates regarding Brazil. So the USTR did hold a public hearing into the alleged unfair trade practices by Brazil. So areas under scrutiny here are agriculture subsidies, manufactured good tariffs, and digital service measures. And you know, this marks a broadening of Section 301 focus. It's moving beyond Asia and into the Western Hemisphere. So the key deadlines have already passed, but are still worth noting. So back in August, there was a deadline for written comments. On September 3rd, we saw the public hearing, and then on September 11th was the rebuttal comments deadline. So we're going to continue to see these things progress. Again, the key point here is that 301 remains a valid tariff tool. So we do expect that, you know, we may continue to see action here. Okay, anti-dumping and countervailing. So back in August, the Department of Commerce initiated an anti-dumping and countervailing duty investigation into certain solar cells, modules, laminates, and panels containing silicon from India, Indonesia, and Laos. It's not all solar cells or all solar products broadly. The allegations are twofold in that they, and these were prompted by a petition, that the first allegation is regarding dumping. So this claims that exporters are selling products unfairly at low prices in the US market. And then also subsidies claim that foreign governments are providing financial support that undercuts US producers. So once a petition is accepted, it automatically triggers an ITC window to address whether the domestic industry may be injured. So following that, there was a preliminary injury determination back in early September. They did issue an affirmative preliminary determination. So what this means is that they found a reasonable indication that US solar producers are being materially injured. So as a result, this case will now move forward into the Department of Commerce for subsidy and dumping margin calculations. There are some upcoming deadlines to be aware of if you are impacted. So later in October, Commerce will issue its preliminary CBT determination, and then later in December, Commerce will issue its preliminary AD determination. So key takeaways on this one is that, importers who are impacted by solar imports from the named countries should be closely monitoring this case. Preliminary duties could be imposed after Commerce's determination, meaning that there could be cash deposits at the time of entry. And even though final determinations and potential orders are months away, the exposure does begin once the preliminary duties are announced. So if you are impacted, make sure you are following these cases closely. Okay, I think this is the hot topic of the day. So getting into what's going on with the IEEPA court cases. So back in August, the Federal Circuit ruled that the IEEPA tariff, does not authorize the imposition of tariffs. This ruling effectively undercuts the legal foundation of certain presidential tariff actions that did rely on the IEEPA authority. However, this decision is stayed until October, which means that right now the tariffs are still in force, at least for now. In September, the Supreme Court agreed to review the case. So this has set the stage for there to be a landmark decision on the scope of presidential trade powers. Oral arguments in the case are scheduled for early November, on November 5th. Depending on this outcome, this ruling, it could significantly reshape the executive authority over trade remedies and tariff setting powers. The key deadlines here, October 14th, the Federal Circuit stay expires, and November 5th, the Supreme Court is going to hear those oral arguments. Now, potential refund pathways here. So big if, the Supreme Court ultimately invalidates the tariffs under IEEPA, there may be several different ways this could go, and nobody knows the answer to this yet. But say there is the option for importers to seek refunds. This could create opportunities, but the refund processes could be lengthy and could require legal action and/or administrative claims, which I'll talk about more. This could be one of the most impactful trade cases in recent history. It could directly, determine the impact of this unilateral power over tariffs. Currently, the outcome again is uncertain. There is multiple different ways this could result, and it could be a lengthy process before a decision is made. So just because the oral arguments are scheduled for November, it doesn't mean we're going to be getting a decision on November 6th. It doesn't mean we'll get a decision by Thanksgiving. This could get dragged out. So there's going to be a lot to keep in mind here. And really what companies should be doing at this point is make sure that you have a handle on your impacted entries. Make sure that you have documentation for these entries. Make sure you're coordinating with your customs brokers to make sure that if and when there is going to be any refund opportunity, that you are ready to go. So talking more about the entry dates and liquidation timelines, I've been getting a lot of questions about this regarding, say I can get a refund, how does this work? So I want to talk about that and how it relates to post-summary corrections and protest processing. So I want to start off with the entry date. This is also called the time of entry. This is the date when the entry summary is filed in the proper form with duties estimated and attached. So importantly, this date can never be earlier than the actual date of import in the US. So on your 7501 form, you'll find your entry date reflected there in box 7. This is also going to be reflected in your data, either received from your customs broker or from ACE. And what is liquidation? So liquidation is the final computation of duties owed on an entry. Think of it as CBP's final stamp of approval on the duty amount for that entry. For importers, this matters because once an entry is liquidated, it becomes final unless it is protested or that liquidation is extended or suspended by CBP. So how this works in practice, CBP processes liquidations weekly. Entry summaries are liquidated every Friday. And once ACE liquidates an entry, the liquidation date is automatically set to the next Friday. So if entries are processed before Wednesday at midnight, they appear on the same week's Friday posting. And if they process later, they roll into the following Friday. Formal notices of liquidation, they are posted on CBP's website and they remain visible for at least 15 months. And why does this matter? So, the entry date and liquidation timelines affect your ability to file post-summary corrections. They affect your protest deadlines. And as such, any entry corrections that need to be filed, any refunds that may need to be received, will need to keep the liquidation date in mind. Missing liquidation extensions, protest windows, these can result in your duties being locked in. So again, monitoring the liquidation time frames is a compliance must. So a little bit more about what is a post-summary correction, what is a protest. So a PSC, a post-summary correction, is essentially a replacement of an entry summary before liquidation. So a post-summary correction can be used to correct entries for most issues. It is the way for brokers to correct formal entries once they have been accepted electronically. The key requirements are that an entry must be in accepted status and in CBP's control and not under CBP review. Duties must have already been paid and the entry must not be liquidated. So if you are on a periodic monthly statement and you pay your duties to customs once per month, if you need to file a post-summary correction, you have to wait until your duties are actually paid for a post-summary correction to be able to be filed. As far as timing goes, PSCs can be submitted within 300 days of the entry date, but no later than 15 days before liquidation, whichever comes first. And if CBP does approve a liquidation extension, that window is then extended. So the key takeaway with post-summary corrections, they are a proactive correction tool. They allow the trade, your customs broker, to fix errors before CBP finalizes the duties and could be used to process refunds potentially, again, big if, they are authorized. On to protests. So protests are the formal legal mechanism for challenging CBP's decisions. Common reasons for filing a protest could include clerical errors, mistakes of fact, inadvertence in CBP's decisions. Brokers and importers have 180 days from the notice of liquidation to file a protest. And once filed, CBP reviews the protest and all related entry data and documentation. And legally, they have 2 years from the date of filing to issue a decision. Usually, in practice, we see these, happen a little bit faster than that, but legally, they do have a 2-year time frame. So the key takeaway with protests, these are reactive. The importer waits until CBP liquidates the entry and then files the protest to challenge the final calculation if there is an error. So together, PSCs and protests, they provide importers and brokers with proactive and reactive pathways to correct and challenge entries. And the distinction here between the two is that PSCs are addressed before liquidation and protests are filed after. Okay, so the actual process here. So again, big if tariffs are ultimately overturned or modified, importers may need to use these processes, both post-summary corrections and protests. And the first step is to determine which entry summaries are impacted. Which ones do you need to go chase down to get corrections filed? This is where coordination with your broker is critical. So, they can help by providing data for your entry summaries, help you understand which tariffs are impacted, and they will be the ones filing your post-summary corrections. Now, I've been getting a lot of questions regarding liquidation extensions. Okay, so a liquidation extension is where you ask CBP to extend your liquidation timeframe while waiting for the ruling from the Supreme Court. As of now, we are not aware that CBP is granting these extensions to liquidations for a pending litigation reason. Okay, so as of now, you can file, but I am not aware of CBP granting these for this reason. Okay, so the risks and challenges here are that the refund processes, likely would not happen automatically. Okay. If you do have a drawback claim, the claims may be held until PSCs or protests are resolved. If you file recon, there's also some nuance to be aware of. So if you have an entry summary file flagged for recon, a PSC may not be allowed for that same issue. CBP will liquidate recon entries except for the flag issues, which remain open until the final reconciliation liquidation. So the other thing to keep in mind here is that when you're filing post-summary corrections, when you're filing protests, you need to prepare for greater scrutiny from CBP. They will request documents from you. They will dig into your entries. So again, compliance is king. Okay, so making sure you've got all your ducks in a row and your compliance house in order is especially important. ACH refunds, I do want to talk about this because there has been some updates recently. So it is important to note that CBP is moving towards exclusively handling refunds via ACH refund processes. So if you do not yet have an ACE portal account, it is time to get one. Okay, so get your ACE portal account because the way you sign up for ACH refunds is within your ACE portal. Okay, this is going to be within the ACH refund authorization tab within your ACE portal. And then once you have your banking account set up in there, CBP would issue refunds back to the bank account that is designated. So the key takeaway here is that make sure you have your ACH refund processes set up in advance, especially if you have not gone through this process and do not have an ACE portal, definitely get that going and get your ACH refund account set up. So again, refunds may be available if tariffs are struck down. There's a whole lot of question mark around that, okay? But the process will likely be neither automatic nor fast. The important thing to do here is proactively track your entries, file pro-summary corrections or protests where necessary, ensure your ACH refund is set up, and again, the upcoming Supreme Court decision, this will be the pivotal trigger for whether these refunds actually materialize and how it shakes out, okay? There's many different ways this could happen. So here's just an example for those who are more visual as far as the entry filing timeline. So this sample entry is just going to show you kind of how the timeline is going to work. So in this scenario, say an entry date was January 10th of 2025. The summary would be due by January 27th of 2025. This is when the entry summary is transmitted and accepted. This date sets the clock for many of the downstream deadlines. Okay, so in this scenario, the last day to file your post-summary correction, which again is 300 days and no less than 15 days before liquidation, this would be November 6th, 2025. Okay, the estimated liquidation date in this scenario is November 21st, and then your last day to file protest would be in May of 2026. So again, it is important to track the entry dates, track your summary dates, track your liquidation dates, because they all can impact, number one, which mechanism would need to be used, but also the deadlines that would be associated. Okay. Since we've been talking a lot about IEEPA tariffs and the potential Supreme Court ruling, I do want to talk about, the different tariff tool authorities. This again, it highlights, what has been used and what could potentially be used to impose or adjust different tariffs. So each of these sections highlighted here, these come from different trade laws, okay? Each have unique triggers and limitations, and some we're very familiar with at this point, and some maybe we haven't heard of yet, and because these haven't been used to implement tariffs. So Section 232, it allows the president to impose tariffs when imports threaten national security. It is often used, in a sector or product specific way, like we've seen with auto, steel, aluminum, copper. These are the most prominent examples, and now we're seeing these expand into other sectors. So these do require an investigation by the Department of Commerce, and they do give the president broad discretion once a threat has been determined. So the agency here for Section 232 is going to be Commerce. There is no time limit on how long these tariffs can be in place, and also no tariff rate limit under Section 232. Section 301 deals with trade agreement violations and unfair trade practices. This is what we've been seeing with China and also expanding into Brazil and Nicaragua. This one, it has remained central to enforcing trade commitments and has been part of our tariff policy for many years now. This one is under USTR. The tariff duration limit for this one is 4 years with unlimited extensions, and there is no tariff rate limit under Section 301. IEEPA, this is triggered by national emergencies related to foreign threats, as we have seen with the fentanyl orders and with the Liberation Day reciprocal tariff orders. There is no agency for this one, and there obviously is this big question of whether or not these can be used to impose tariffs. Historically, before this administration, these had not been used for tariffs and only had been used for sanction purposes and things like that. Under IEEPA, there is no agency, there is no tariff duration limit, and there is no tariff rate limit outlined. Section 201 talks about safeguards. So Section 201 allows temporary tariffs or quotas to protect domestic industries from a surge of imports. So we've seen these used in the past, for solar and washing machines. These measures are time limited. And what they're meant to do is give U.S. producers breathing room to adjust to these surges in imports. So the agency here for Section 201 is going to be the ITC, and there is a tariff duration of 4 years plus a 4-year extension. There is a tariff max of 50%, and there is a phase down required, which is meant to, again, create that breathing room over time. The two I want to mention that could become part of our vernacular potentially are Section 122 and Section 338. So Section 122 is about the balance of payments, okay? So it specifically addresses international payment imbalances, and it was written to address a serious balance of payment problem. So for example, this could be something like, a rapid loss of U.S. foreign exchange reserves, although, it could technically be used to impose temporary tariffs. It has never been used before, okay? This does reflect, this, very slim economic scenario that this was designed to address. Section 122, it's not under any agency. It does have a tariff duration limit of 150 days and does have a max tariff rate of 15%. Okay, and the last one here is Section 338. And what this one does is it deals with discrimination against U.S. commerce. So this empowers the president to respond when, say, a foreign country or its nationals engage in different discriminatory or unreasonable trade practices that could burden U.S. commerce. So like Section 122, again, never have been used to impose tariffs, but it's a dormant tool, right? It's in the legal toolkit. It could happen. The president could use it to increase duties, impose new duties or restrictions, or take Section 338. This one also has no tariff limit as far as duration, but it does have a rate limit of 50%. So taken together, and the reason why I'm telling you this is because, there are a variety of different levers, right, that could be pulled in the future here. Some we're very familiar with, some are dormant, some are, symbolic, but they do create flexibility in U.S. trade policy, and it does allow for the administration to potentially impose tariffs without waiting for legislation in some cases. So again, if we do see IEEPA struck down, we may see some of these others get more play, okay? Okay, last up, I want to talk about the hierarchy of tariff application and the foundation of trade compliance. So the question that everybody wants the answers to is, what is my final rate that is going to apply to my import? Okay, this is the answer that, is essential for planning. It's essential for landed cost. It's not always an easy answer, right? Especially with all of this, all of the changes going on. So the bottom of this pyramid, okay, is going to be the foundation of determining your tariff application with some of these other factors coming into play, okay? But you always need to know and get your country of origin right, get your product classification or HTS right, and get the value right. This is what determines which other programs and tariffs you may need to look at, and it drives that total final duty rate, okay? Once you have that information, you can move on to seeing if you have different free trade agreements that may or may not be available, okay? If they are, you then need to make sure that they qualify, because just because a product is made in a country doesn't mean that it conforms with all of the requirements of a free trade agreement as far as the rules of origin go. Okay, next you have your date of entry. And, with all of this fluctuation, right, with in-transit exemptions for using foreign trade zones and bonded warehouses for in-bond movements, determining your rate of entry, your date of entry, excuse me, is essential to understand which tariffs will apply. You also have Chapter 98 provisions. There's a lot of fun stuff in this chapter, okay? So if you're not familiar with it, there are different things in here that you could potentially explore as far as, products that have been exported and re-imported, temporary imports. There's a lot of good stuff in here, right? So it's important to understand the different Chapter 98 provisions and understand if those could be used to potentially mitigate tariffs. Next, the U.S. has some quotas on specific products. Quotas are based on usually how much is imported in a given year. This might change the rate, okay? This is, again, is only specific to specific commodities. You have anti-dumping, you have countervailing duties. You've got, your different tariff orders for IEEPA fentanyl, Section 301, Section 232, 201, and reciprocal, okay? All of these things, right, in our foundation here in this pyramid determine that top point of what is the final duty rate that applies to my product. But again, the point and the reason I'm telling you this is that getting that bottom of the foundation right drives the rest of this stuff, okay? So this is going to set you up for success. And keep in mind that as far as determining your origin, determining your product classification and your valuation, if you are an importer in the United States, you are responsible for due diligence here and making sure that you get this stuff right. So very important. All right, so things to be watching. We did talk about a lot today. The trade environment remains incredibly dynamic, whether it's Section 232 expansions, Section 301, anti-dumping and countervailing, the legal challenges to IEEPA. Each of these developments has real world impact and implications for your compliance, for your cost, and for your supply chain planning. So, timing and precision matters. Entry dates, liquidation cycles, post-summary corrections, protests, all of these will determine your ability to correct entries, okay? Policy shifts from government shutdown impacts to new tariff investigations. These can all rapidly change your obligations. So, staying proactive here is essential. Again, refunds and relief, we don't know yet, right? They may be possible, but again, the key point here is keeping track of your filings, maintaining accurate documentation, making sure your entries are right, so that you're ready to act, if and when this becomes a reality. So, at Green, our goal here is to help you cut through the noise, giving you actionable information for what's going on with trade environment, so that you can take clear actions, protect your business. Thank you for spending time with us today. I know we covered a lot of information. I do know how busy you are. We value, the trust that you place in us. So don't hesitate to reach out if you'd like a deeper dive into any of these issues that we discussed and how they could impact your specific operations. So with that, I have not been able to keep an eye on the chat. So let me just do that real quick. Let me see if we have any questions. Let's see here. I don't think we do. Unless I'm missing them, I do not see any questions. Okay. With that, I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Thank you again for joining us and have a good one.